Hi everyone, this is Professor Benjamin, and the purpose of this video is to give you an overview of Session 1. So this week we'll be covering Tragedy of the Commons and their introduction session. Technically, the first thing you want to do, of course, is read the Session 1 Introduction to Tragedy of the Commons description. It'll give you some wonderful background on the session that we're covering, or on the chapters that we're covering. Chapter 1, technically if we had a textbook, this would be the PowerPoint that's related to the textbook. I will give you specific video lectures on these PowerPoints, and there will also be one on the Tragedy of the Commons as well. So you'll see those added to this module as we move forward. I want to give you one helpful hint. When you open up, especially the PowerPoints from the textbook, which I'm going to add content to, and I've deleted and added visuals to the PowerPoints, when you open them up, if you look here in PowerPoint, if you notice, if you keep it not in slideshow view, you'll actually see that underneath, there is actually lecture material as well. So I will give you video lecture, but there's also lecture material underneath each slide. You will need to open that in PowerPoint to do that, okay? So you cannot see that if you put it on as a slideshow. All right. Another thing that a brief thing that I want to show you too is that if you notice under some of the modules, you'll notice that some of the material, for example, if you click on it, it might say to you, see this error that comes up? If you just click here, it will take you to the outside document. So if you just click here, it'll take you outside of Canvas to read the document. So don't fret when you see that there's an error message there. So number one, we'll go through the PowerPoints, and remember I'll have video lectures for that. I'll have lectures for the Tragedy of the Commons PowerPoint. You have a required podcast to listen to. It's very short. You have the reading, The Tragedy of the Commons by Garrett Hardin. This document is essential to environmental conservation. It is 32 pages long. I know you're going to stress out about it, but you have to read it. And I want you to take this in mind as you're reading it, is that this is a college level paper, so there might be some parts of it that are a little bit difficult to understand, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. The main point of the paper is that Garrett Hardin writes a rebuttal to somebody, William Foster Lloyd, and this is discussed in the Tragedy of the Commons PowerPoint. You'll see that. He writes this rebuttal, and it is 32 pages, but what he does is he outlines all the technical solutions that have been given to Commons problems and the problems with those technical solutions. So the whole objective of this paper is to say, listen, there are all these technical solutions that people try to have put policies and welfare state and mutual corrosion and privatization and all of these different ideas that people have tried to implement to stop Tragedy of the Commons, but there are all problems with those technical solutions. Rather, the solution to Tragedy of the Commons is education and a moral component. And a lot of times technical solutions are lacking those, so that is the problem. So you'll read this document. There's a video about battling Asian carp that has to do with Tragedy of the Commons in terms of when we bring invasive species in, when humans bring invasive species in to the environment, they can be considered a Tragedy of the Commons, because what happens is we look for a short-term gain. We think there's a pretty flower. You know, you go visit Hawaii, you see a beautiful flower, you bring it back home. But what you don't realize is in that flower there could be a bug, or if you bring it home and replant it, that could become an invasive species, because we're only looking for that short-term gain rather than the long-term interest of society. And that's what Tragedy of the Commons talks about, this idea of the commons and the fact that we look for our short-term gain, which is use it now, and we don't think of the long-term interests of society. So we look at using national parks now and eroding them, but we don't think about the future and the future generations that have those. So this is why Tragedy of the Commons is important. This is a wonderful reading on why the Gulf oil spill, which was the fact that we tried to privatize commons, which were the oceans, and we leased them out to oil companies, and what happened was those oil companies then destroyed the commons. There was a massive oil spill and they destroyed the commons. So there are a lot of problems with trying to protect commons. Now remember, a commons is a shared space. So anything that we share, air, water, land, anything that we share, and they could be big, like the air, the ocean, the land, or they could be maybe just a community park or a classroom. Anything that we share is considered a commons, and a lot of times we look for a short-term gain of that commons and we don't think about the long-term interest. So littering is a great example. We look for a short-term gain, which is I want to get rid of this garbage, but we don't think about the long-term interest, which is the fact that I'm destroying this entire neighborhood by me littering, and I'm causing the house values to decrease. Also the fact that that litter then runs into the water systems and plagues our streams. So there's a lot of things that we don't think about when we look at short-term gains, and so that's a good one. This is a good example of an invasive species that was brought in that caused a major problem. So the idea of, the fact that we bring these invasive species in, like Asian carp and the toothy pike, to solve one problem, and because we're looking for our short-term interests as humans, but we forget about the long-term interests of the entire area. And so these are two really good examples of that. Then you'll have just this week, you only have one post due. So you have one introduction post due and you have 2 response posts due. So 1 initial post due and 2 response posts. So what you'll do is you'll log in here, you'll pick one of these questions that you want to answer, and you will write out an answer to it. It has to be at least 300 words. It has to contain proper citations, in-text citations. There's material under the course information page that can help you with it. So in Garrett Hardin's rebuttal, which was of additional reading this week, Hardin speaks about our national parks and combating overuse. Is this the correct way to solve the problem? So you want to bring in multiple articles, Garrett Hardin's article, and then bring in the Gulf oil spill or another article that you've read, and you can create an answer. Now remember, your answers and initial posts do not include I statements. So this isn't your opinion. This is yes, no, and these are the reasons why. Okay, so here is describe a tragedy of the commons in your neighborhood. The current day tragedy of the commons, the Gulf oil spill, is privatization of our oceans justifiable? And I want you to read the Garrett Hardin article before you answer that, because if we privatize commons, are they then commons anymore? Are they shared by everyone, or are they not? Because once we privatize something, don't you have to pay to get onto it, and then is it really a commons anymore? And this becomes a social justice issue. So people who are privy to the commons, if they're privatized, are only the people that can afford to have access to them. So these are big problems with privatization of our commons. Then there's the privatization when the owner has moral compass, and then there's listening to the podcast about the dock. So these are the questions. You're going to pick one of these questions and answer it by Wednesday 11:59, and then by Friday 11:59 you're going to respond to 2 of your classmates and their posts, and agree, disagree, and explain why. Okay, so week 1, it's a little bit easier because I like for you to get your feet wet in terms of this, but I walked you through all the different articles that we have and podcasts and videos that you have available to you for this session. So enjoy the session, enjoy the material. Next week we'll work on session 2, and I'll put up an overview video of that session as well.